The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back. Giants baseball, past, present, and future. I'm Ralph Tyko of the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and the host, the esteemed Michael Duca. How are you?
I am uncomfortably zoned. No, I'm fine. I'm just going through withdrawal because there's no baseball for what? Well, pitchers and catchers report in 103 days. Okay.
I know. We're going to talk about the Hot Stove League, what we do. We're going to continue what we talked about, gaming, board games, fantasy leagues, this, that, and the other thing. But first, let's pay homage to when I say the Giants' number one competitor, not just here, but back in New York. The Dodgers made the World Series. They did not win, and I have to admit, I was rooting for the Dodgers over the Astros. You?
Well, Houston, we have liftoff.
Yes, finally.
In one of those interesting confluences, one of the great things about the World Series is that no matter how many games you've seen, no matter how many games have been played, there's a record set every single night. And one of the confluences of history here was that in their first ever World Series Game 7, the Houston Astros defeated the Dodgers, who were hosting the first ever World Series Game 7 at Dodger Stadium.
Whoa.
And
very interesting stat.
Indeed. And then, you punch all that together with the Dodgers not having been to the series in 29 years, which is actually a longer drought than the Giants have ever suffered. And the 27 years that the Giants suffered seemed like an eternity and a half. Then you have to kind of feel a little bit for the Dodgers, who have in some slight way become the Buffalo Bills of baseball. They have now lost more World Series than any other team.
Wow.
And
you say, well, at least they were in them.
That's right. And that's the other side of that coin. Just like leading the league in double plays means you also probably lead the league in leadoff runners put on base.
Right.
Losing 13 World Series means you've been to a hell of a lot of them.
A lot. And the one they won when I was a kid, that I recall around World Series time, was 1955. And I recall
that was their first one.
The first one, and back in Brooklyn, I was a kid growing up in New York, a Giant fan, and it's the day before Padres goes out. It was Tommy Byrne was, if I'm not mistaken, was the pitcher he pitched against, and but I could be wrong on that one. Anyway, I'm talking to my friend who lived across the street, Neil Silver, who was a Dodger fan. We're both 10 years old. And it's 1955, and up until that final game, the Giants are the world champions. Mm-hmm. And it was right before game time. Neil, who's the world champion? They're playing the Yankees. It's not going to be the Giants. I can remember going at 10 years old, Neil, right now, who's the world champion? And it was the Giants. And then it was the Dodgers. And even then, when the Dodgers played the Yankees, I had absolutely no rooting interest, much like this World Series, where if the Astros won, it was great. If the Dodgers won, it was great. I rooted for the Dodgers a little bit. Of course, if I root for them, they're going to lose. If I root for anybody, I'm a Met fan, they're going to lose. But it's all about Dodgers-Giants rivalry, and every little thing you can come up with along the way. The Dodgers can probably make a case for having the better franchise in L.A. Now, the Giants can make a case for having the better franchise in San Francisco between the two. What do you say? Looking at it, their overall success, up, down, again, you have to include those three world championships in it all. Who has the advantage as of now?
As of this moment?
Yeah.
Or historically up to now?
No, historically, Giants, Dodgers in San Francisco and L.A. Up to this moment. Take it all.
Historically, I've got to give the edge to the Dodgers. As much as it pains me, believe me, it pained me greatly to be a high school student and a Giants fan living in Los Angeles and listening to the Giants perennially, almost put a no trespassing sign around second place for the entire decade of the 1960s.
Right.
They won more games in that decade than any other team and only made one World Series. And we all know how that turned out.
Yep. Line drive.
Yeah, why didn't they send Matty Alou? Over that history, though, the Dodgers were, it seemed like, equally as possessive of the territory surrounding October baseball. Back in those days, it truly was the October Classic, and it was the fairly early October Classic. We didn't have 6 rounds of playoffs to go through in order to figure out who was going to be in the World Series. But then the Giants hit on a very lean spell after 1971, and it was not good for a long time. They were a bad team for about 16 years, and the Dodgers weren't. They weren't great, but they were plugging along, and they had some World Series. They had, we had the infamous and brilliant Reggie Jackson World Series, and Reggie Jackson and Tom Niedenfuer and Bob Welch and those guys. So but over the years, the Dodgers have generally managed to have better teams than the Giants. I've always thought that had a lot to do with the fact that they seem to have more, shall we say, more commitment to baseball within their ownership group until the McCourt years came along and the Fox years came along. But, then things kind of, the script got flipped for quite a while. I mean, when Fox took over the team, that worked just about as well as when CBS bought the Yankees, and not at all. And then they sold it to Frank McCourt and his wife, who thought that it would be cute to use, the crown jewel of the National League as
leverage,
as a chew toy in their public divorce battle.
Right. That was disgraceful.
So, yeah. Well, everything about that ownership was disgraceful. Right down to McCourt trying to sell the team but keep the land under the stadium so that he could do whatever the hell it was that he was going to do. There were rumors that they were going to swap the land with the downtown land that allegedly was going to host a new football stadium. That's the one that's actually out in Inglewood now. But there was stuff with Anschutz going on where they had a commitment from State Farm for $1 gazillion to sponsor a stadium, and it was going to be downtown. And then everybody got together and said, you know what would be really cool is to build an NFL experience, a league-constructed NFL experience up at Chavez Ravine, where the access isn't so great for traffic, and so you only do it 10 times a year. It's a much better idea, and we'll put the baseball stadium right downtown. And this was McCourt's wrangling throughout the entire divorce process, was that he didn't care about the team and he didn't care about the stadium. He just wanted the parking lot. He wanted the land so that he could soak the NFL for, $500 billion for it. And predictably, the baseball fortunes of those teams suffered mightily. They suffered from just outright neglect under Fox, and then from woeful mismanagement under the McCourts. And then the new group came in with all the money in the world and a plan that was highly analytical and number crunching based, and it came close this year. You know, I honestly think that the Dodgers were there because of the analytics. That's how they found players like Chris Taylor and Justin Turner, and, you know, some of the other scrap heap pickups that they've made over the years that have turned out well is through deep analytics. But I also think that the deep analytics...
What's with Puig? Puig is an enigma, isn't he?
A Puig? Well, you know, here's the deal.
Puig, I'm
sorry. The Dodgers did not win the World Series this year, and if you really want to look at a reason for why the Dodgers did not win the World Series this year, I think it's twofold. I think one part was Dave Roberts being held more closely to the analytical company line. You know, the only time that he allowed a pitcher to face a batter the third time through the rotation as a starter, other than Kershaw, was when he let Rich Hill walk George Springer before pulling him after 4 innings. Yeah, and the Astros actually came to analytics before the Dodgers, and maybe that's why they're 1 year smarter, because they told A.J. Hinch, these are the guidelines, and they're pretty strict guidelines, but they're not absolute. We still hire you to look in a guy's eye and measure what you see there. There's still something to be said for having an actual manager and not just having artificial intelligence tell the team what to do. But what happened in this World Series was that the Dodgers found holes in the Astros found holes in Cody Bellinger's swing, and they exploited them, to great effect. 16 to 17 strikeouts.
That inside curveball right in on him. He just lowered in. He just looks terrible. He didn't look like him. He looked like a pitcher coming up the bat.
Right, and what's funny about that, two things are funny about that. One is that even after he finally got his first 2 hits in the World Series by shortening up his stroke and hitting the ball up the middle, he refused to do that in the last 2 games and went right back to, you know, looking like he was trying to compete with John Bailey in the long drive contest. And it's interesting that John Smoltz on the broadcast picked that out and said, you know, they've exposed holes in his swing. He's going to have to go back and make adjustments. And yet you look at his numbers, and he hit 260 in the World Series, give or take, which is not a terrible number. And the World Series batting averages tend to be somewhat lower. But here's the guy who they really solved and who nobody said anything about because I think they were so dumbfounded that they didn't know what to say. And that's Justin Turner. The Astros pitching staff treated Justin Turner like a redheaded stepchild the entire series. He hit about $135 or $140. He had 1 home run. I think he drove in 2 runs in the series, and they were on the home run. And it's interesting to me that nobody said he's going to have to go back. But boy, did they sure figure out how to shut him down. This guy hit almost 200 points below his season's average. This was a 322 hitter during the season and a guy who's going to get some MVP votes, and he just disappeared. When you can make the heart and soul of a team disappear, a World Series, you're probably going to win it.
You mentioned no artificial intelligence for a manager. I think that's more true. You should have that with managers and pitching staffs. You got to look in a guy's eye. Numbers don't mean anything from batter to batter with pitchers. They're either on, they're off, they're improved, they're tired, they're not rested. That's where a manager comes in, and I don't think, Dave Roberts, first-year guy, this, that, and the other thing, I don't think he was doing that. I think he was out of sync with his pitchers totally.
Well, I'm going to point out a significant difference between the Dodgers and the Astros here. And in a series as close as this one, it's a significant enough difference to make the difference between whether you are in a parade or watching a parade. And that is Dave Roberts was a center fielder, and A.J. Hinch was a catcher. Catchers are the best managers. If you go up and down the league, the National League West, if I'm not mistaken, before Bud Black moved into Colorado, I think they had 5 catchers managing. You got a catcher managing up in Seattle also. There's catchers managing everywhere. St. Louis. The Yankees had a pretty good catcher as their manager until a couple of weeks ago.
Right. Did that surprise you?
What they did?
Yeah.
Not entirely. Not entirely. And you're going to ask me why it didn't surprise me, just because it was so heavily rumored. It was so heavily rumored in the last week or so that even if the Yankees won, that Girardi may be finding may just want to move on. And I'm not sure that wasn't a mutual decision. I know he said all the right things, but I also know that he's said in the past that each year he would go to his family and ask them, should I keep doing this or do you want me home for a while? And I know Joe Girardi well enough, and I know people who've worked with him. I have a friend, a female who works for Fox Sports, who spent a lot of time in the booths and who's told me which ball players are trustworthy and which ones aren't, and which broadcasters are trustworthy and which ones aren't. And, when Girardi was broadcasting, he was looked at as probably the most honorable and gentlemanly person ever to grace a broadcast booth for Fox.
Wow.
So I fully believe that it was not the typical ruse of, I'm giving this up to pursue other opportunities and spend more time with my family. That's usually PR speak for, I got nothing ahead of me right now, but if you got a job open, let me know.
Right. Dusty Baker, we have to address that. The way Washington handled it, they left him hanging, had him go back to California, and then called him on the phone. I don't know.
Well, I'm going to tip a whole lot of my hands all at once with what I'm about to say. Gee, cowardice in the nation's capital doesn't surprise me a bit.
Yeah. I thought that was very, you take a guy, 15-year playing career and a 15-year managerial career, 30 years, nobody doesn't like and respect Dusty Baker. He may not be the best handler of pitchers. He may not even be the best manager around. But you know what? Have the decency. I harken back to an interview that Hank Sauer gave me, where I said to him towards the end of the interview, I said, Hank, you spent all these years with the Giants. Do you consider yourself a Giant or a Cub or something? He says, I got a story to tell you. And how they fired him, it was pretty much exactly the same way. His words, they sent the shoeshine boy to fire me. It was Speck Richardson's assistant, Ralph Nelson. And instead of Speck Richardson having the balls to call him in the office and say, we just don't want you anymore, this, that, and the other thing, you could understand, you have your assistant call, Hank Sauer, after 30 years, that kind of thing. Crazy. It's human nature. It's human frailty. And these people that run things are cruel and big business is cruel. And that's my rant about Dusty, one of the true gentlemen of the game, of course.
Yeah, I simply don't have words to describe how ridiculous it is to fire somebody who wins 97 games for you and who loses Game 5 of a playoff round on an umpire's error, on an error on the rules. And the one thing you should be able to count on in a game that important is that your umpires are going to execute the rules correctly. And if they aren't sure about executing the rules correctly, then, even if the rules don't say go to the replay umpire, you figure out a way to go to the replay umpire and say, hey, quick, look in the rule book and tell me.
Right, or huddle up, for crying out loud. You got 6 of them there. Yeah.
Well, yeah, the results of the huddle up weren't so great on another call there where they kind of they did huddle up on that call, didn't they? Didn't they huddle up on that call? Wasn't it that call that they decided that it was not a foul tip, that the ball had gotten away, but everybody ignored the fact that the interference made the ball dead immediately? I didn't understand how they managed to botch that. I was screaming at both the screen and my wife as that ball was rolling back towards the backstop. That's a dead ball.
Yeah.
I knew that instantly. If your swing makes contact with the catcher, you're out. If the runner is running on the play, he goes back. It's just that simple. If you hit the ball, it's not even a situation like a balk where you have the opportunity where the defense has, you hit into a double play, defense loses the double play because the ball was dead as soon as the catcher was hit.
Right. How do you handle your winners? How do you handle your hot stove? Do you have leagues?
I'm like Rogers Hornsby. I'm like Rogers Hornsby, the famous quote. People ask me what I do in the off season. I'll tell you what I do in the off season. I sit and look out my window every day and look for the first sign of spring.
Yeah. Well,
I count the days.
Difficult to do that in California. Every day is spring.
Well, not really. I have a garden in the backyard, and there's a definite difference between my summer garden and my winter garden. I don't get to harvest basil in February or tomatoes.
Okay, that's true. But, even on a day where they're predicting nasty weather, I'm looking out the window right now in Northern California. The sun's trying to peek through a little bit.
I've got clear sunshine up here a little bit north of the Bay Bridge. Actually, a little bit north of the Richmond Bridge.
Very cool. What's a typical day in your life in the off season? I mean, every day you've got baseball. That has to be either a come down or a relief. Which is it initially, and could you use 2 or 3 weeks, no more, or even are you ready to go tomorrow?
I did Arizona Fall League one year. I don't know if that answers the question or not.
Okay.
However,
you're ready to go.
For me, it's a come down for the week after the World Series, just because I have to decompress from what's kind of wall-to-wall intensity. Mm-hmm. And then after that week, then it's actually a relief to be without the everyday responsibility, the everyday grind. It's kind of a relief to wake up in the morning, pick up my phone, and have it say, you have no events scheduled today for a little while. And then, January rolls around, and as soon as the holidays are over, I'm, mentally beginning to prepare myself for an 800-mile drive and figuring out what I'm going to pack for spring training.
Yeah, that's a good feel. I remember when I did the Tops gig in the 80s and 90s, just planning, getting ready, knowing you're going, packing the car, this, that, and the other thing. That's very cool. That's very cool. Well, let me tell you what I do, and we'll get into our little talk about board games. I bought maybe 10 years ago, and I bought some updates to it, a game called Baseball Mogul. And I don't do the financial part of it, but the game enables me. It's a simulation game of statistics and a little bit of board play, a little bit of gameplay, but mostly statistics, where I can load a league of my favorite teams of all time. And I'm going to give you the teams that I loaded and and some of the memories they bring forth. I loaded a National League team that consists of every one of the original 8s, and here they are. It's the 64 St. Louis team, the 64 Phillies, the 69 Cubs, the 58 Braves, the 61 Reds, the 60 Pirates, the 54 Giants, the 55 Dodgers, and I don't think I forgot anybody, but there are 2 more. The 62 Giants and the 63 Dodgers. So I have 10 teams, and I manage the teams. It's all set on computer, but I manage the 54 Giants and the 62 Giants. When they play against each other, I just set it on automatic. And I manage those teams against the league. And that's my league. It's total solitaire. I set the lineups against left-handers, against right-handers. The game tells me who's tired to take a guy out. I don't play with injuries, so that I turn the injury factor off, so that it comes down to pure statistics. And that's how I get through my winter. I just play that and kind of enjoy it. And then I have an American League as well, but we won't get into that one.
Well,
you, sir?
I usually manage to have a fairly competitive fantasy football team.
Okay.
This year, I've had a rough go with my fantasy team. I've lost 2 games by the equivalent of a field goal in head-to-head matchup. I lost my backup quarterback. I lost my starting running back and my backup running back and my second backup running back to either suspensions or injuries. I have Ezekiel Elliott. And so I don't think that's going to be occupying me very intensely as we roll into November and December. I covered Cal basketball for Bear Insider for 16 years. They had an ownership change. Yes, they had an ownership change this year. And let's just put it this way. I got treated worse than Hank Sauer. I still haven't gotten the phone call from the Shoeshine Boy.
Really?
So I'll be doing that for sports radio service instead this year. I'm in the local TV union, so as winter rolls around, I get to do talent stats for visiting NBA teams on occasion, and also some stuff for local college basketball. And I continue to be an ESPN employee even after the football season is over. So when they broadcast basketball in the Bay Area, I usually am employed. But for the most part, I would say my actual work time, quote unquote, is about 15 hours a week in the off season.
How do you fill that up? What kind of play do you bring in? What do you do to keep interested?
Honestly, I have a very large DVR, and there are TV programs that I enjoy watching, series on Netflix or HBO, and I have a tendency to binge watch in the off season. I'll sit down with my wife and we'll go through an entire season of something in a day or two or three.
I'll do that. I'll tell you what I'm working on. Tally and I are working on 6 Feet Under. I missed it in the 90s. It's pretty cool. I don't know if you've watched that.
I watched every episode each week. I was a big 6 Feet Under fan. Dexter before there was Dexter.
And my other one is Larry David's Curb Your Enthusiasm. As an old New York Jew, I get a big kick out of Larry
David. You know who you share that with is, oh God, and now my mind has gone blank. Former Sharks coach, Ron Wilson.
Oh, really?
Ron Wilson, who was, as you might guess, head coaches in professional sports wind up being extremely tech savvy. And Ron Wilson, back when he was coaching the Sharks at the beginning of this millennium, had a video server set up in his house with a VPN so that he could, while on the road, connect to it and catch up on the TV shows that were important to him. And Curb Your Enthusiasm was 1, 2, and 3 on that list.
Oh, God. There are some scenes that I can't even say on a podcast. I can't even talk about on a podcast that are incredible. And what made me think of it today, he does this thing, a takeoff on McCord, on that divorce thing in L.A. And if you ever go back and look at that.
I'll have to watch that one. I do remember one where he wound up getting arrested in Dodger Stadium, if I remember right.
I think he brought a hooker to Dodger Stadium to get into the fast lane, and I think his friend got arrested. He had a jacket. He went to the men's room. He asked his friend to hold the jacket. And he
right.
Grass in the jacket.
And the police were looking for someone who matched the description.
Right. They had a dog, and they smelled the jacket, and they took his friend away. And outrageous. Great mind. Seinfeld notwithstanding, which could have been the all-time great TV show. He followed that in a venue where he could say or do anything. There's always buttons he was pushing somewhere along the line, and we all know people like that just have to grudge, just have to push that extra button. And he did it in every little subtle way, from the waiter to his bosses, at the network, to people he worked with, to his wife, to his agent. Terrific show.
To me, we talk about things like who was the greatest center fielder of all time. Here, I'll pose you a question. Which was the better final episode, MASH or Seinfeld?
Yeah, I don't remember Seinfeld's final episode. They refer to it on Curb when they joke around with the reunion episode.
Seinfeld's final episode was 2 hours long. The premise was that they all were going to go to London and that NBC had provided them with a private jet. And the private jet has a mechanical problem and has to land somewhere in New England. I forget where. And so they're taken to this small town in New England where they're being typically self-absorbed. And the late, great John Pinette is being mugged in his car across the street, and they're sitting there making fat jokes. And it turns out that they're in a town where it is illegal not to help in that situation. They are arrested for essentially being themselves, thrown into jail, go to trial, and at the trial, everybody from the history of Seinfeld comes back to testify against them. Everybody.
The soup Nazi.
Soup Nazi is there. No. I mean, Poppy comes back. Babu comes back from Pakistan. They give him a special visa to come into the country to testify, just to get up on the stand and say, "You are a very bad man, very, very bad man." I mean, they oh God, I mean, the Johnny Cochran character is there for the prosecution. It's, everybody Sue Ellen Mischke comes in without a bra. I mean, every character that they have dissed over the years repeatedly shows up and testifies against them, and the show basically just ends where they decide that the four of them are going to get together and put on a show for the inmates, since they're going to spend the next 2 years in jail. And it's strictly, it's like the entire series has come home to roost. All their self-absorbed, selfish, navel-gazing, complete unawareness of other human beings on the planet behavior comes home at one time.
Now, tell me
or MASH.
Okay. Now, MASH, I was thinking of the Colonel dying.
No, the final episode.
That wasn't
MASH,
it. There was another Colonel after that.
One of them. The first character, the actor actually passed away, and so they had
the other
him
one.
Die in a
the other one, I think, Henry Morgan.
Harry Morgan. Harry Morgan. Yeah, he recently passed away.
If you remember Henry Morgan.
What's my line?
Very dry guy, Henry Morgan. He was very interesting. Michael, what a memory you have.
And I always wondered, even at the time, what Henry Morgan's real name was. I figured it was Morgenthau.
Right.
He was clearly, just by his delivery and his pacing, he clearly grew up in your old neighborhood. He was, I would bet the farm that this was a member of the tribes from somewhere across the East River.
Well, I'll tell you a member of the tribe that he just recently died, and until the day before he died, literally, I didn't know that Shelley Berman played Larry David's dad on Curb Your Enthusiasm. Shelley Berman didn't have this guy was a great actor to play that role at the end. Funniest thing I've seen is their interaction. And Shelley Berman has a very interesting story. He was a stand-up. He had an appearance on a TV show. I don't know if it was Steve Allen or what, but he's in the middle of his act, and TV was filmed live back then, and a backstage telephone goes off, and he was so engrossed in his act, and there was so much pressure that telephone going off, this guy literally had a nervous breakdown on stage on a TV show back then, back in the 50s or early 60s. So he comes back and plays the role. Rest in peace, died a few months ago. He plays the role of Larry David's dad, and genius-like performance.
I had Shelley Berman records when I was a kid.
Very clever guy. Much more gentle than a Lenny Bruce. He wasn't quite as caustic. He wasn't as he didn't pave the way like a Lenny Bruce or Colin did, but he was right up there. Very clever guy.
Boy, I'll tell you, the 60s were an absolute golden age for comedy. I mean, you had comedy records. You had Bill Dana, Von Meter. I mean, remember those two? Von Meter did The First Family, did a complete long-playing record, doing a John Kennedy impression. You had Bob Newhart, who did Telephone.
The unzipped mind of Bob Newhart. He would do. Yeah. He did stuff that was so incredible. He did The Bus Driver. Did Bob Newhart. Then you had Cosby going at it.
Cosby. Why is there air? Why is there air? Well, to inflate volleyballs and apparently to deflate footballs.
Lord, I want you to build an ark. Noah, is that you? Great stuff.
Yeah,
Great stuff.
To me, one of the funniest routines of my childhood. Captain of the Settlers is the captain of the Redcoats. Captain of the Redcoats is captain of the Settlers. Shake hands. Redcoats are the visitors. Call it in the air. Tails, and it is heads. Heads. Settlers, you get to decide. Okay, so the Redcoats have to wear bright uniforms and march in straight lines, and you can hide in houses and behind rocks and trees. Okay, let's go.
I blank on who that was. That could have been any of those.
That was Cosby.
Okay. That could have been Bob Newhart, too, that same kind of...
It could have, except with Bob Newhart, it would have been delivered a lot slower.
Right. And then there was Steve Allen, who had records, and he had the Man on the Street records, one of whom was Don Knotts. I don't know if you remember him. Tom Houston. Don Knotts would play. He'd come on and say, "What's your name?" He'd go, KB Morrison. And he said, "Well, you seem a little nervous. What does the KB stand for?" "Oh, what do you do?" He says, "I'm a munitions expert." And he says, "What does the KB stand for?" "Oh, no. S.L. Morrison." That's what it was. S.L. Morrison. "Sorry, lady." Or he was the plastic surgeon. There was what is the S.L.? "Sorry, lady."
Yeah. I remember Bob and Ray.
Bob and Ray, too, yes.
I mean, all these guys were there in the 60s, and like you said, Lenny Bruce earlier, and Shelley Berman.
And Carl Reiner and Mel Brooks. They had some great stuff.
10,000-year-old man.
Yeah. "Hello there. This is me from back then, way back then." Lenny Bruce.
And when you say hello there, I think of two other people immediately. I think of Rossi, Martini and Rossi.
Yeah, they played cab drivers. Rossi and his buddy played cab drivers.
Yeah. And the other guy that I think of when you say hello there is Alan Sherman.
Yes, rest his
soul,
too.
Mata.
Here I am in Camp Granada. Da. Alan Sherman was very clever, too.
Yeah.
There was a guy who did voices, and I'm blanking on him, and I have no way to look it up on the Internet.
It couldn't have been Mel Blanc, could it? No, you wouldn't blank on that.
No, this guy, he'd have his brain talking to his body parts. I can't think of it, and it's what I'm saying sounds like babble right now. I'll come up with it for next time.
Okay.
All right. Hey, see, we're getting through the winter. We're one step closer. And you mentioned something too. Remember back when the World Series was over on October 8th, October 9th? Now we have one less month to go before spring training. So
yes, but you know, everybody wonders how it was that the Yankees and even the Dodgers could have such potent dynasties back in the day, and now as good as players are and as good as front offices are, you don't see that anymore, and you just gave the reason. You know, back in the day, you played 154 plus 7, or maybe 162 plus 7, or on a very, very rare instance, 165 plus 7. But now you've got an entire month of pressure-packed baseball stacked onto what's almost always an entire month of September that's pressure-packed baseball. You can understand how the teams that survive that and win haven't got a whole lot to give the next year.
Very good point. Besides the idea that everybody's gunning for you, that a lousy team can come in and have a great series, and that's like their World Series. So
you have that, and on top of that, you've got, you know, the reality of the situation here is that the Astros go home, and they'll have a parade probably tomorrow or the next day, and then they'll pack everything the day after that, and they'll get home around the 5th of November. It's almost Thanksgiving already. And
right.
Then you get into the holidays, and, you know, the rest of the league stop playing on October 1st, and they start their off-season conditioning after about 6 weeks off, which is November 15th. Well, if the Astros take 6 weeks off, that's New Year's, or almost. It's basically Christmas week, and who's going to start their conditioning Christmas week? So you wait till after New Year's, so your conditioning is 5 weeks behind everybody else's in the off season.
And you've got all these banquets, you're eating more than you ever ate.
Right.
From that standpoint.
Or you're obsessive, like 100 pence, and you start your conditioning on time, November 15th, after 5 days off. And that wears out your body. So, you know, no matter how you look at it, either your body or your mind is going to get worn down with a championship season. You've got, you know, plus there's more opportunities. I mean, you know, when the Giants won in 2010, you got to remember, they bought a special vehicle for that trophy and took it on tour all over California and even to New York. They took it to Finnerty's. They took it to the site of home plate in the Polo Grounds. And, you know, that wears on an organization, and that grinds on the players who are tapped to go out and make the appearances with the trophy. So, you know, it's gotten to a point where the season is now, I think, so long that it becomes next to impossible for a team to repeat.
Right. Michael, I have notes here. Last week we talked about the coaching situation, which was much more in limbo than it is now. Would you go over the changes, please?
Well, Hensley Mullins has been moved from hitting instructor to bench coach. Ron Wotus retains his defensive infield instructor duties, moves from bench coach back to third base coach where he started his career, which some people probably will see as a demotion. I don't. I don't necessarily see it as a demotion at all because, let's face it, the Giants have been searching desperately for a third base coach ever since Tim Flannery retired. And they certainly know, I mean, Wotus was good enough at it to become the bench coach after a number of years as third base coach. So I think he's once again showing that he is as good a soldier as the organization has. It was just announced that they have a new hitting coach. Alonzo Powell, who they drafted originally. Never made it to the major leagues with the Giants, but he did play with a few other teams, put in 6 years in Japan. He has been the assistant hitting coach for the world champion Houston Astros. So good news for him. He doesn't have to change any of the colors in his wardrobe. He can still go with orange and black. And, you know, it's an interesting get. Powell's 52 years old. He does not have the Astros young hitters to work with in San Francisco, but he's got some veteran hitters who have some skills. And it will be very interesting to see how much he brings with him from Houston of the metrics approach. You know, I think that's the primary reason that the Giants went after him, is that he's a guy who's old enough to command respect as a hitting instructor, but young enough to have bought into the whole analytical, numerical approach. So he might be kind of their transition guy.
And here's a guy who won 3 straight batting championships in Japan. That's no small feat. Let's put it that way. So he's obviously
no. If I remember correctly, you know, and I could be wrong about this, but if I remember correctly, the only other guy to win 3 straight batting championships in Japan in the last 30 years was a fellow named Ichiro.
Oh, really? Whoa, that's some good pedigree, if you will. Yeah. What an amazing career! Absolute amazing career. He was no spring chicken when he comes to America. And if I'm not mistaken, he's got close to 3,000 hits. Or does he have 3,000?
He has more than 3,000. And in fact, if you combine what he did in Japan, he has more hits than Pete Rose.
Oh, okay. I lost track there. Wow.
He's awful good. Let's just put it that way. He's awful good.
Yeah.
First time I ever saw him play in person, he unleashed the greatest throw I have ever seen on a baseball field.
Really?
Yeah. And there was nothing really exceptional about the situation. It was just Terrence Long on first base, Oakland Coliseum. Long is running with a pitch. And the ball is a line drive over second base that's fielded about, I would say, 260 to 270 feet from home plate in kind of straightaway right center field. Ichiro comes in on the ball, picks it up, and completely in stride, unloads a throw at his own ear level that never loses altitude until the last 20 feet when it drops directly into the third baseman's glove and Long slides into the ball. And it was such a low throw to begin with, and it was in the air so long. I had time sitting in the press box to say out loud, "That's going to short hop the third baseman." It didn't. It dropped directly into his glove, which he had laying on the ground. He didn't even reach for the ball. It was just astonishing.
Perfect throw.
It was, I mean, to me, it was like, you know, the one play that I wish I had seen in my lifetime that I didn't occurred in Kansas City, and I had it described to me by both Dick Tidrow and Buck O'Neill, who were both there sitting together in Buck's seats in the front row on the third baseline in Kansas City. And it was Bo Jackson taking a line drive off the wall, barehanded, with Ken Devereaux rounding third base on the play. And Bo unleashing a throw without striding. He was still basically facing the corner. Unleashed a throw over his own shoulder that also went over Ken Devereaux's shoulder. and threw him out by 25 feet at home plate. Would have been closer, except that Devereaux stopped running and started laughing when the ball came over his shoulder.
Wow.
I did a 330-foot throw from the left field corner without striding.
I have to correct something we talked about. It was not indeed Dick Tidrow who passed away. It was Pat Dobson. And Pat Dobson was an assistant to Al Rosen, and he died prematurely. So he was the fellow that I was thinking about, not Dick Tidrow.
Yes, former Braves pitcher, if I remember correctly.
I think he pitched with the Orioles too, if I'm not mistaken. Was he one of the 20-game winners back in '71?
I think he was. Palmer and McNally and Dobson, and who was the fourth one? Was it Cuellar?
Cuellar.
Like Cuellar. Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Those days are long gone.
Yes, I know. And we're still here. And remember our promise. We're going to go to each other's 90th birthday party.
Absolutely.
Okay. So keep it up. And we'll be back next week. Congratulations to the Astros. And we start the Hot Stove League officially today.
Well, remember, free agency began at 6 o'clock this morning.
Oh.
So
good.
We'll have stuff to talk about next week.
We'll always have stuff to talk about. No, under no circumstances will they be able to shut us up. That's for damn sure.
All right.
If you're in Alameda later on, I'm meeting up with your friend Jerry Feidelberg and Nancy Finley. They are the host and hostess of the A's show on this very network, and we'll be at Nations at 1 o'clock. So if you're out and about, we'd sure love to have you as a guest.
That'd be the Nations on Grand Avenue in Alameda?
On Webster in Alameda.
Webster. All right, Webster. Thank you. All right. I will see. The other thing that I do in the off season that I didn't talk about because it's really not baseball related is I host one of the venues for the Napa Valley Film Festival, which is next week. And the Valley is open for business. Come see us. Please come see us. Even if it's just for a day. If you want to know how to help
that doesn't know, the Northern California area has been hit by probably the most devastating tragedy, biggest fire, most losses, most financial losses, most people killed, most people displaced. It's been horrible, and the Napa Valley is quickly recovering. People have bound together, and it's bittersweet, let's put it that way.
Yes, and the theme of this year's film festival somehow magically is uplifting. All of the movies have, in one way or another, being uplifted as part of their raison d'être. And anyway, I have that to do, and I have to go up and pick up my credentials today in Napa. So the chances of me actually being able to do that and get to Alameda are less than zero since I don't have a helicopter.
Well, then there is officially a rain check being printed right now. It'll get to you by the time you hang up.
I will accept that, and if we schedule it in advance, I'll be happy to do that.
This was very, very impromptu, and we'll do it next time.
Okay.
Be well, sir.
Thank you. You also. I'll talk to you next week.
All right, everybody out there, keep on keeping on. We'll be back. Adios.